So you want to go to Jerusalem. And if you're like my dad, he's 86 years old, and he goes, no, I think I'll just stay here, Roanoke, Virginia. And his phrase lately is, I never want to leave the USA again. You want to go to Jerusalem, and my answer would be, you really do want to go to Jerusalem. If you ever get a chance, go. And usually most people are like, is it safe to go? And the answer is, it's absolutely safe to go. Until, here's the caveat, until the world blows up and then, things go bad. But if you ever get a chance to go to Jerusalem, go to Jerusalem. I represent King University. And about every 2 years, I take kids over. I call them kids. Can I do that? I take kids over to Israel and Palestine. And 1 year, we do a 2-week dig, and then I take them around for 11 days. And then the next year, I only take them around for 11 days. But did I mention that I'm 60 now, and I may have to use that stool? I'm just kind of getting too old for it. So I'm looking for someone maybe young and competent and who's traveled internationally, maybe train that person to maybe kind of pick. You see who I'm looking at, don't you? Yeah? Okay. And Jerusalem is one of the most amazing, wonderful, maddening, crazy places you'll ever be. But this is 2,000 years later. I'm talking about Jerusalem here in Luke chapter 19. Am I in Luke chapter 19? Is that correct? What's my passage? Help me out. What? Yeah, Luke 9:51. Luke 9, chapter 51, and what I'm going to do is read just a little bit. And this is I grew up Baptist. This is the Baptist in me. I may stop and just explain a few things, if you don't mind my doing that. That upsets some Presbyterians. I'm Presbyterian. Okay, I can say that. But I'd like to say a few things. But I want to say this, and in fact, Lily already gave the sermon, and she did a phenomenal job. But Luke chapter 9 is about Jesus going to Jerusalem. And true confession this morning, I don't know if I like this passage or not. How do you like that? Preacher shows up and it's like, hey, this is our passage today, and I don't know if I like this or not. Because, and here's one of the things I want us to understand, and this is not the most important thing. And I think in the past, when I was younger, I used to emphasize this more. But I don't know if you know this or not, but Jesus was just a little bit controversial. He really mixed it up. He really stirred it up. And there's a place when I was younger, you read about the crucifixion of Jesus, and it was kind of a shock. But as you get older and you read the Gospels and you realize that, and I say this very respectfully, it makes all the sense in the world that Jesus was crucified. Because he went almost against everything. I don't mean, of course, meaning immorally, but he upset the political system and he upset the religious system. And he came along, and this is what you're not supposed to do in religion, right? He asked some really tough questions. And he chose, you know this better than I do, he chose to live an entirely different life. And again, just a few minutes left. If I get lost in my words here and get lost in this passage, here's what I'm trying to say this morning. The reason why Jesus went to Jerusalem, and here's the thing, and Lily said it beautifully. The reason why he went to Jerusalem was to suffer. He knew what was coming. He knew that. And I don't know about you, but I can really be a big chicken. And if I knew that I was supposed to go to Jerusalem, and this is what's waiting for me in Jerusalem, I'm going the exact opposite way. And I don't know about you, but if you know that there's trouble ahead, are you going to step into that trouble? Not unless you really don't like yourself. And so here Jesus comes to Jerusalem, and here's what I really want to say. When I tell you that he was going to Jerusalem to suffer, what I'm really saying is he went to Jerusalem to love. And you're like, oh my goodness, I've heard this my entire life. But no, hang on. Because when I tell you that he goes to Jerusalem to suffer, which actually he is going to Jerusalem to love, it doesn't look like love. It does definitely look like suffer. But I think one of the lessons that we learned this morning is, you ready for this? All people under 21, don't just close your ears. Don't listen to this. But love is suffering. And when I was 18, love was wowzers, man. And all you have to do to kind of fix that is get married. Am I too cynical? It's a beautiful day. Look outside. Sun, all you got to do is get married and live with someone, or go to college and have a roommate. Woo. But love is suffering. And I brought a book to quote. I'm already out of time. I'm not going to quote it, but a book that I've been reading lately by a Russian filmmaker. And I don't know if I agree with him or not, but he says, true love is loving when you're not loved back. I don't know if I agree with that. But let me say it again, because it's bothered me all week, all right? He says that true, deep loving is loving when you don't get anything back. And I don't like that either. Because for me, growing up here and being young, I thought the definition of love was loving somebody is getting everything you ever dreamed of. Anybody with me on that? And yet, as we get older, and as we get married, and as we have relationships, and as we work with people, and now I'm really learning. I have a 27-year-old and a 17-year-old. You have children, and boy, does that question love sometimes or what? Doesn't it? And I think this passage teaches us that Jesus knew what he was doing, and he could have gone the other way, but he went to Jerusalem to suffer. And somehow, you can say, well, it's because he was God, he was deity, and I would agree with you. I don't disagree with you. But somehow, he knew what his future was, and he chose to go that direction. And I'm out of time. I don't even get time to read the passage. Don't tell the pastor I did that, okay? But if you read Luke chapter 9, and by the way, it's one of the longest chapters in the Bible. If you ever read the Bible through, I think this is like a 3-dayer, all right? It's a long passage. And it's interesting when you read this chapter, and if you know some of the other Gospels, you read this chapter and it's almost like taking, I'm exaggerating, but about a third of the Gospel of Mark and putting it in one chapter. But essentially, here's the short story. Jesus lived in Galilee, which is up north, right on the Sea of Galilee. His center of ministry was Capernaum. And if you ever go to Israel with us at any point, I hope you can. If you do, we'll go to Capernaum. We'll spend a morning there. Jesus, his ministry was way up in Galilee, and he's going to go down to Jerusalem. And back then, it took 2 to 2.5 days to get there. You could ride a donkey and maybe get there in 1 3/4. And if you had a fast donkey, no. And so he's going south, and you know this as well as I do. A good Jew would never go directly south, which would be going through Samaria. Because the Jews hated the Samaritans, this is their view, because they were racially mixed, again, their view, and because they didn't really worship the true God. They didn't worship at Jerusalem. And so Jesus, what's he going to do? He goes through Samaria. And he sends his disciples ahead to prepare the way. And of course, the Samaritans hear that here comes this Jew. He's coming through their land, and he wants preparations made. And their answer is, no. You can't stay here. You can't come through here. Now watch this. And his favorite disciples say, Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven and barbecue them? This is the original Greek. But I mean, that's what they say. Lord, do you just, you that way? How about, you can do whatever you want to do. Let's just call some fire down from heaven. And Jesus says, nope. And I want you to hear this. He doesn't really come out and say this, but this is what he says. I didn't come for that. And then someone comes up and it goes, Lord, I want to follow you. And Jesus says, okay, here's the cost. Never mind. And then someone comes up, and you know this very well. Someone comes up and says, I want to follow you, except my father just died, and let me bury my father, and then I'll come join you. And then Jesus says, this is one of the reasons why I don't think I like this passage. Jesus said, you remember this? What? Let the dead bury the dead. In 2019, we would call that culturally insensitive. And so Jesus says all these controversial things, and I don't want to get caught up, and I think part of it is hyperbole. I think he actually said this, but I think it's a contrast because it says literally in the Greek, he set his face toward Jerusalem, and he was going to go to Jerusalem, and nothing was going to stop him. My last phrase, and I'm done. Love is suffering, and love is setting our face toward anyone that we love, and we keep going and we keep going and we keep going and we keep loving. I'm not preaching at you this morning. I don't even live that well with this idea, but this is how I'd like to live at some point. This is what Jesus is teaching us.
I invite you in response to that word this morning to stand, and with one voice let us affirm our faith using a statement from the brief statement of faith. All good things. Well, we'll use this instead. In gratitude to God, empowered by the Spirit, we strive to serve Christ in our daily tasks and to live holy and joyful lives, even as we watch for God's new heaven and earth, praying, "Come, Lord Jesus." You may be seated, and let us bring to the Lord our tithes and offerings.